Hello, Black Blockchain Summit. It is so good to reconvene. I know we're not here in person, but it's so great just to have some type of fellowship in which we can get together and talk about this wonderful world of blockchain. I'm your host for this, BARAZA, Deidre McIntyre, founder of Black Blockchain Summit. I'm going to introduce our panelists in a minute, but I felt it was a good opportunity to play a little game with them first, something to kind of throw them off their rocker a little bit, kind of relax the mood before we get into the nitty gritty of our topic. Now, our BARAZA is called Enabling Black Land and Asset Ownership Using Blockchain. However, I want each of my panelists to just give their first name and pretend for a minute that their favorite 10-year-old niece or nephew comes up to them and says, I hear you're going to be on the internet, an internet star, and you're going to talk about this Bitcoin thing. I want to see the panel. What's it about? How do you explain this to a 10-year-old niece and nephew who loves you so much and thinks that everybody on YouTube is a star? How do you break this down for them to understand what you're going to talk about today? So let's kick it off with Patrick first. And those of you in the chat, you can actually try to play along with this as well. What would you say to a 10-year-old child if you were on this panel? And how would you explain what the topic is about? Go ahead, Patrick.
Hey, thank you so much, my dear. And I would love to start by saying to my 10-year-old niece, who's actually a reality figure in for real, you know, hey, you know what this is about? This is about maintaining records of a purchase of a piece of land or pieces of land where we're going to build something and maintaining it electronically in the most stable means possible, using a type of technology that the way that we do it now sets up the template for you to do it better later on, and gives us the most secure way to do this so that it's accessible electronically or over the wireless networks that you use as securely and as safely as possible. Is that too big?
I think that's pretty good. You know, Chris, you want to take a stab at this?
Sure. So I would try to break it down for the kid so they could understand what it means to them, in that when I was 10, I loved going over to my grandma's house to hang out with my cousins, and all the cousins would go over to grandma's house and grandma and granddaddy's house. So I would explain to that 10-year-old, like, hey, you have cousins, you go over to grandma and granddaddy's house. Sometimes grandma and granddaddy can't pay their bills. And we got to make sure that if grandma and granddaddy don't pay their bills, like 1 month, that they don't lose their house, so you can keep going over grandma and granddaddy's house. Because sometimes people will get in a situation like a pandemic, and sometimes people get sick and they can't pay their bills. And then somebody will come in and take their house away because they couldn't pay one bill. And the kid will be like, really? And I'll be like, yeah, it's like that, because this is something that the system has decided is how they're going to treat people, and specifically people that look like you and me, because if this happens to your little white friends, they won't take their grandma and granddaddy's homes away. And they'll be like, really? Why? And I'll have to explain, well, because the system sees you and me as different than your little white friends. So you have to understand that when we have to create systems to protect grandma and granddaddy from these people, that the system has to not know if we're black or white. And it can't be able to tell if we look like us or we look like your little white friends. So we got to make sure that the systems we use to purchase these homes aren't able to discriminate against us and then come and take grandma and granddaddy's home away, because then you won't be able to go over there next week or the week after if they can't pay their bill. And that's where I would try to break it down so they understood that it's not just about technology, it's about being able to go over grandma and granddaddy's house.
Wow, those are two very relevant and different answers, and very much giving a wide perspective. Troy, do you have anything to add to that? What would you tell your favorite 10-year-old niece or nephew who's so excited? Uncle Troy, you're gonna be on the YouTube. Break it
well,
down.
those were powerful answers. So it's a tough act to follow. I guess what I would say is, that what we're going to talk about is a sort of a system where instead of, kind of people keeping track of things in some, kind of physical location or in some centralized kind of, location on the internet, which would be subject to potentially, getting hacked or otherwise attacked, and that they kind of understand those concepts, right? Is we're going to be talking about how you create a system to manage these records on a decentralized kind of consensus type basis. And I'd probably get some blank looks, so I'd have to dig into that a little bit deeper. But yeah, that's probably the right way that I would kind of frame it for them.
Now, the reason why I put this little role play up initially, not only do I have a 10-year-old, I have a 10-year-old asks a lot of questions, and she's fascinated like anyone else about, who's on YouTube and who's doing makeup and who's doing what. And I think she learned more a little bit about Bitcoin from other peers her age. Might not be the right thing, but from peers her age on YouTube than she is from me talking about it, because it's more like, yeah, I want this snack, I want this, or whatever. And so, but the thing about a 10-year-old is that they do ask a lot of questions. Now, also on the other end of the spectrum, have a 16-year-old who is at the I think I know everything phase. So
Right.
I wanted to peer into that 10-year-old because we have to realize that even as adults, there's a lot of 10-year-olds in us. We've always been in situations that if you have never been to a medical conference before and you went in and they use certain vocabulary, you'd be a little lost. Or if you went to a construction industry conference. And with Black Blockchain Summit, every single year we have new people who have an inner 10-year-old, but they have that 16-year-old persona. I'm not going to ask anything, that I'm just going to nod my head and say, I know what's going on. I know what's going on. So I would kind of want to break that wall around. And I hope that those of you in the chat room had fun with that little role play. And hopefully we'll get to see your answers soon. And that pose that type of challenge of any of these panel discussions of how do you explain this to a fifth grader, so to speak, that they understand some idea of what's going on. Now let's tack into the who everyone is and how it relates to enabling Black land and asset ownership using blockchain. So we're going to reverse the order. We're going to start with Troy to give us a brief 2-minute explanation of your background and how you see what you've either done in the past or what you intend to do in the future that connects to this topic.
Yeah, sure. So I am a partner in the corporate and securities group at Perkins Coie, focusing on emerging growth companies. And I do probably 35 to 40% of my work in the blockchain space. So, primarily I focus on companies that are going to be offering either securities for sale or tokens for sale. And sometimes those are the same thing. Sometimes they're not. There's been some, developments on that at the SEC front, and we, kind of stay abreast of all that. But that's sort of been my focus area, on this. And I, as I think about I think from an industry perspective, blockchain is still relatively new technology, and we all, should be thinking about, use cases to propel it forward, right? I mean, that's sort of, that's really kind of the onus is on us as an emerging industry to do that, right? And so real estate, I think, presents a relatively unique opportunity there, because the chain of title, like there's so much in it that is sort of well suited to a blockchain solution that it feels like an important use case for us as an industry to be pushing.
Okay, Chris, tell us about your background and how it connects to Black land and asset ownership on the blockchain.
Hello, everyone. My name is Larry Christopher Bates. I am a cybersecurity expert, and I got my first master's degree in telecommunications, and I got my second master's degree in cybersecurity. And after that, I started working on land right protection using blockchain technology, working with a company I co-founded called Bitland Global. So I show this card because what we tried to do is, so on one side I have the Kenyan flag and then the Ghanaian flag. So what we're trying to do, we had established this notion of trying to use blockchain technology to solve land title protection problems. And in the process, we encountered a lot of cultural nuances. So what we ended up doing is effectively becoming an educational organization, understanding that a lot of technological implementation comes down to people understanding why they need to use it, as Deidre is sort of alluding to with her example in the beginning, or what it even is. So people need to have these things presented to them in a way that relates to them specifically. And what we started to realize early on was that the problems that afflict the African continent are similar in many cases, but because of the cultural nuances between different countries and different tribes, you can't just use a one-size-fits-all approach. So as with Bitland, what we tried to do was establish a white label technology that could then be modified for cultural nuances, understanding that there's going to be different tribal law, different country law, different international law, and all these things are going to affect how you implement the blockchain. So you can't use a one-size-fits-all approach. So with that experience, I then turned back towards academic pursuits, and now I'm working on a doctorate in cybersecurity to help establish why there's a disconnect between theory and application in the real world, and try to start to close that gap.
Thank you, Chris. Patrick, tell us about yourself and your consulting, and also how it relates to Black land and asset ownership using blockchain.
Oh, he might be muted. Patrick, you might be muted. Nope. There you go.
Is that good now?
Yeah.
There
Thank
you go.
so much, brother.
Start again.
Thank you. Yeah, so as a young guy, I worked for Barclays Bank here in the Caribbean. I was a basketball player. I had a lot of fun in life. But at Barclays, I tended to rise to the top pretty fast. So I became the head of wealth for the Barclays Group. And part of my role was interfacing with Barclays Private Bank. And that allowed me to launch the premier banking product across the region, which allowed me to work closely with the Queen's Secretary, Lord Fellows. And so I was quickly introduced into what's called old money. And so several of the key players in the global economy would bank with me, literally. And I was able to meet, what was then the aristocracy. And I had roles like that over 30 years in banking. So the value of real estate became a very real proposition for me, because it would be one of the things that I would use as security in high-valued loans and high-value transactions, where I sat as one of the 40, quote-unquote, brightest minds in the Barclays Group, with the Barclays Capital, Barclays Mutual Funds, and these entities themselves. I'm not kidding you when I tell you, we had over 900 billion US dollars under management. That's a lot of money. And so I was advising on those kinds of transactions with that kind of capital base. And I had lots of fun because, people would fly in on their private jets to Barbados, where it's kind of like the land of the rich and famous. And they would meet with me. The names that you would see associated with Hollywood and with all of the brand name stuff that goes on in the world, they would meet here on Barbados, right? The legacy of Barbados is interesting because it's the only place that George Washington went to outside the U.S., and he got the vision for doing what he did in the United States here in Barbados. Also in Barbados, just trivia, just to give you an understanding of what goes on here, it was the first place that the Africans landed en route to the Caribbean and up north to the United States, right? And so, interestingly enough, it was the place also that the British kind of had their largest outpost because of the value of sugar cane. Sugar was the currency of the world. And so the idea that Barbados had such a past kind of trotted along the way, to become an island today where the rich and famous still hang out to this day. And so there's not a lot of land in Barbados. It's 166 square miles. And so the oldest Jewish synagogue and the oldest Bible school in the entire Western Hemisphere are found here in Barbados, right? It's the third largest legislative body in the world as far as parliament systems. And the person who did the desegregation in the United States, the legal case for desegregation, that was the first in history won on that basis of desegregation, was born in Barbados. Shirley Chisholm grew up in Barbados, the first black person to run as president backed by a major political party. She grew up in Barbados and she was my client. So that gives you kind of like my background. I've been there, I've seen some good people over time. And, you know, I began to listen to people that would come into my office. I mean, without calling any names, I can assure you, some of the major players in wealth would sit with me and I would facilitate their wealth, right? So I think that qualifies me to talk about, therefore, land as the head of wealth for the Barclays Group in this region where there's a lot of wealth.
He's frozen.
Wealthy come.
Someone else.
We were able to, through me, negotiate some of the biggest land purchases and, you know, from the Bahamas all the way down to the rest of the Caribbean. We were able to do some transactions. And let me say that each of the offices that we would do the transactions through, we would come up with solutions that would not just benefit the shareholders, but the clients themselves. And so everyone walked away happy because owning a spot of land in the Caribbean, and these days, especially Barbados, it became something of a thing that you have to do, you know? The royal family are here, the Hollywooders are here, and, you know, the benefit of having this experience was something that the rich would want to do. So that's my background. And so the land itself, the land ownership component, because we're now moving to a more secure platform, you know, we'd work with some of the top lawyers across the space, from the United States to the UK to wherever. And now that we're looking at a blockchain solution, I believe that we, particularly of African descent, this is not just the thing that seems to be our thing, but it's our moment. Our black brothers and sisters are going to be doing this. This is kind of like the lead thing, because I've now brought this knowledge of how to do high net worth and ordinary worth products and real estate the old way into the new way, where I sit on several boards for some of the more innovative blockchain entities, and I advise central banks. As a matter of fact, the first true central bank digital currency, I was the lead consultant that did that, which is the EC Bank, the OECS central bank. I called up my buddy who is the governor of that bank, and I said, hey, listen, let's do this. I wrote the white paper for the United Nations, which is, you know, used at the moment as one of the lead consulting tools. And so, you know, that's what we did. So bringing those two things together, the blockchain component and of course the banking, traditional banking component with the real estate and securing the value of that asset that the bank would ordinarily hold, or the customer, the client, bringing those two together on a secure network that is secure in more ways than one, that's where we are. And I want to say this is where we are at the forefront now in this discussion, at the forefront of where it matters most, because you see, assets, It's the pivotal tool in acquiring and securing wealth. So we're at the forefront of it all in this discussion right now.
Thank you, Patrick. I want to go back to Chris for a second, and we're going to go again to Troy and back to you, Patrick, with different questions. Chris, you mentioned you had a relationship in terms of education, specifically with Ghana, and I wanted to know, has there been any tick on the meter of anything in relates to the return, beyond the return that was in Ghana, and anything about Americans buying property, some type of opportunity to try a new system, if there is even something beyond tourism that happened in that specific realm? Because you mentioned in Ghana, in terms of property, I know there was a large promotion of the country of Ghana offering citizenship to the diaspora, and specifically, and you know, obviously there's property involved with that, and what your thoughts were on that instance.
So this is a extremely touchy subject, in that I want to be very cautious about how I speak about this, because of I'm not trying to offend any government initiatives or point fingers. But what ends up happening with these types of initiatives is the only people who were able to actually take advantage of them were wealthy people who were already wealthy. And the reason is because the systematic theft of Black capital has left a large percentage of families in America without the available capital to seize on an opportunity like this. So when the Ghanaian government is offering an opportunity for Black people to come get their citizenship and come buy land, it's a hollow gesture at best, in that when they are trying to present this as if it's an opportunity, they are standing at the gates at which they were selling our ancestors, trying to say we need to pay our way back, rather than paying our way back for us. So what I'm saying is, if African governments want Black people to start buying land and start investing over there, they're going to have to give us our citizenship and give us a ticket over there, because we are not at a situation where we have the luxury capital to move ourselves or to purchase land outright in the same way. Unless they're giving us loans, unless they're giving us zero interest or negative interest rate loans, we're not going to be able to seize on that opportunity. I would have loved, as someone who's been working on land right ownership, I would have loved to take advantage of the opportunity. I would have loved to get a dual citizenship in any country in Africa, for that matter. But as of now, it's way too expensive and way too difficult for me as a diaspora, like lost son of my home, to go back. It's not because they are making it that way. It's because they are not making it easier for me. They're not actually enabling me. So when they are offering these sorts of hollow gestures, we can't do anything about it, because we are not in a situation as a people to seize on that opportunity. So when they are doing that, they are using the same type of PR hollow gesture that the West has gotten good at, that I am trying to make sure that we don't just take these Western tricks and start mimicking them in our pursuit of capital accumulation and land ownership, because we can't do this in the West, because we don't get equal value for our land. If we are Black and we buy land in the West, we will get 3/4 of what a white person will get for it. I posted a link to an article about how a interracial couple removed all indicators of Blackness in their home, and they got an appraisal that was 125% higher than when they had indicators of Blackness in their home. So these are the things, when we try to play the real estate game in the West, we're already playing in we already know it's systematically racist, but the numbers are in, and we're playing at a rate of 25% losses out the gate just because of our skin color. So when we're talking about how we're going to then reconnect with our motherland, we can't be doing it using these Western games, because this is how we'll end up paying our way back home. We can't pay our way back home.
4 or 5 incomes just to buy what they bought on my block, and then we pay more than the white family. So it's a problem throughout of this ability of being able to be anonymous. You just look at the data of my income, my credit, my whatever, and then, you know, set the same rate for everyone is imperative. I wanted to take the question to Troy, and we only have about 15 minutes left. So Troy, if you could speak for about 7-8 minutes, that would be great. But Troy, you mentioned that you have real estate, but there are other assets as well. If any of your dealings are dealing with other assets, such as resolving issues in terms of art or in terms of any type of other asset other than real estate, you see blockchain solves a problem, or it is a revenue boon. It could be a revenue boon also.
Yeah, for sure. Before that, I just wanted to comment on that story that Chris had raised. I saw that same thing, and I just the one thing that sort of struck me was just how incredibly resourceful that woman was, right? In like looking at this problem and saying, okay, like I get it. I see what's happening here. Let's run this experiment and see how it works, right? Like that level of ingenuity. Like I just have mad respect for, you know, her. Yeah, I mean, you gotta. I
think both of them knew. I mean, I loved his shirt. My husband's shirt said, "Wash your hands." That too.
Right. Exactly. But yeah, in any event, just thinking through like the other asset, like real estate, I think does present a very powerful use case. You know, for me, the place I operate most is in the securities field, right, where you're talking about, you know, right, ownership of the you know, various companies, right, and how you could you know, put that on the blockchain and the problems that solves around, you know, being able to kind of track it. And lots of companies are, you know, kind of looking at these, right, as, you know, different alternatives to the traditional sort of, you know, either stock ledger, right, that is, you know, kept and is subject to, you know, potentially being modified, right, that sort of thing, or even the electronic files, right, where you know, you just don't have the necessarily clear kind of picture of ownership evolving over time. You know, one of the key benefits of the blockchain is the transparency to that ownership and the kind of consensus mechanism for how you track these things, right? So that if a mistake is made, it is not, you know, corrected by a single person, right, operating in the dark, which, you know, has its own challenges associated with it, but it is corrected by, you know, by consensus, right? So the transparency is there. That you know, that record kind of is more trackable over time. And for things like art, authenticating art, that's another you know, kind of use case that I think is developing as well. You know, really anything where you know, it's important to kind of have the record developed over time. And so you know, for me, it's primarily in the securities arena, but there's lots of other areas where you know, people are trying to deploy this technology.
So Patrick, to swing it up to you before I go into a close, because I know we're coming to the end of the recording session, but Patrick, one of the things I wanted to ask you is in terms of Bayesian, in terms of being in the Caribbean region, because Barbados is a larger nation than some of the others, but how do you see it that Barbados can compete with, Canada or United States? What's the allure of property or assets that need to be verified and tracked in terms of bringing wealth to Barbados?
Okay, so that's a good question. And just to see if we can put it within the context of what's going on with other technologies to support the answer, there's this thing about tagging. What we can do is, of course, key something into a blockchain, which is a distributed ledger. The ledger itself is secure. We want to make sure that there is some sort of authenticity to the tagging of the asset. In the area of land, we could have exclusive tagging on land spots that allows for us to, when we key in those specific coordinates, then it becomes visible. This is that piece of land. Or in the case of, we have an asset that is beyond the actual land itself, like a thing like say what we mentioned just now, a painting. The asset itself can be registered with a tag that is unique to the blockchain experience. Then it can be unique to the searcher, the seeker, the investor into the asset. That makes not just authenticity a reality, security a reality, but it also makes accessibility a reality. So that, as say, in the area of like the SEC in the United States and the FSC here in Barbados, you can have access to monitoring the value of that asset, a reality, which investors want to know. How much is this land worth, right? How much is this picture worth? So it adds value. So that then the adjoining technology of tagging and then searching via a search engine, which I must say, the guy who invented search engines is also from Barbados. I bet you did not know that. And he went to school with me, right?
Andreessen? Mark Andreessen?
Yeah. No, his name is actually Alan Emptage, right? And he created this.
Alan Emptage, yeah, when he went to Canada, became a photographer. I know.
Yeah, you know the guy. You know the guy. So he grew up with me in Barbados. He went to school with me at Harrison College, right? Created this thing called Archive.
He's credit Archie, the search engine that he misspelled archive. I do know. I do remember. Okay.
You remember,
yes.
Right?
Yes. Alan Emptage, yes.
Yeah, he was lazy and he created this, right? So what I'm saying is that, the value then of the total package, you have the internet, you have the tagging component, and then you have now with it, right, the ability to search and see what asset you want to have, which is now rare. You can create no capital markets out of that experience. And the land, the house that you may want to put on that land or the potential house, you can search and see and create a fictitious yet real experience of the house value that could come from, that same real estate asset or any other asset. So the blockchain is now usable. And I kind of want to slip back to my colleague who mentioned that there was an experience where he wanted to see that the component of going back to Africa is a real thing. That component, right, of going back to Africa is real, and we can do it in a way that allows the banks in Africa to create a crypto using the same blockchain, a crypto component to the diaspora going back, which can be purchased by people who are in the space, purchased, put on the market by people who are in the space, and then that can fund the going back to Africa of all of our people who want to go. We can raise capital for that.
I've been trying to push that very idea to get to the AU because that's the only way that's actually going to happen. And it's going to have to work with the AU and with all the countries in Africa. That's the only way it's going to actually work. That's the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah, and we can do that together, brother. Listen, right? This is a new era. We're going to work together, hand in hand. You and I, we're going to make this happen, brother. And let me tell you, right, it's going to be an amazingly good experience. It's going to bring brotherhood among us and unity. And let me tell you, I'm on board with you, brother. Shout me out. We're going to do this. We're going to make it happen.
And this is a great segue and a great reminder to people to check the WOVA app, WHOVA, because if our panelists haven't already done it, definitely put your contact information in there. I certainly expect Patrick and Chris to connect. Troy had to leave us a little bit early. He had to tend to some business, but definitely Troy should be able to put his information into the app. Well, I just want to thank Troy Foster, Chris Bates, and Patrick Tanis for joining us on this panel discussion. I'm Deidre McIntyre with Black People in Cryptocurrency, and I know we didn't have an opportunity to really flesh out blockchain in kind of like the 10-year-old style. But, if you're a 10-year-old and just quite figure out that in the 10-year-old can't quite going on and what people are talking about, what we're saying in terms of what's important is, every child that attends a public school system at the very least, or even a private school system, generally has an ID card. So you can have an identical twin sibling. ID number is different from, even though you have the similar face, is different for the card, so the school can attend to you, whether you paid your lunch or, where you're supposed to be at a certain time. They know who you are and they know that you're in school. So all we're talking about is giving an ID number much more detailed ID number to physical things so that people can stake, not only ownership, but also exchange that ownership if they want to sell it or if they want to give it away. Everyone in the world can see this type of transfer. It went from this person to the other person, and no questions and no disputes between nations, within nations, among people. And so that's what we're talking about, the power of blockchain, this idea that Bitcoin made it possible for data to be exchanged for the first time, that there's no duplicate, no fraud, no question, even if it's an accident, oops, you just exchanged it by accident. And so we're talking about how help, people who at the times were not charged the same amount of money for property that we buy. There's also questions about property to buy. We also have the situation of people, especially in the Caribbean, who are affected by hurricanes, and even in the southern United States, and the property is wiped out. How do I verify that what is now dust was where I was and who I am? That property of identity. So this idea of land and asset ownership is critically important every time we hit a hurricane. And every time we get to a situation where people's properties are wiped out, how do I prove, if I no longer have the paperwork, how do I prove? And even in the Northeast, how do I prove if there's a fire? How do I prove that I was there and that was mine when my own bank is gone, as well as my own house? So these are problems that blockchain can survive, so we can stake our ownership. So any parting words? We have about 3 minutes left. Anything else that anyone wants to say between Patrick and Chris?
Yeah, just to sort of add on to what you were saying and what Patrick was alluding to, one of the biggest problems with blockchain is deciding who gets to put the data on the blockchain. And this is like where we're at in the conversation. So this is where we've gotten to a point where we can preserve the data and we can preserve information, but now we have to decide whose information we're going to be preserving. So this is kind of where, when we're talking about arbitrating and getting to a point where this technology is preserving ownership, we have to make sure that the people who are registering the ownership are actually in line with what's happening in the real world, because then we could have a blockchain of ownership that does not align with what actually works in the real world. So that's kind of where this technology is a fantastic opportunity to get ourselves on equal ground concerning capital and preservation of value. But we have to make sure that, as Patrick said, when the people are entering the data values and saying who owns it, that they're actually reflecting the proper values and the proper ownership to make sure the technology isn't just used against us.
Awesome. Patrick, we have about 1 minute.
Sure. I wanted to echo those thoughts from,
I think
I wanted to echo those thoughts from my brother. and authenticity becomes real. And here's what I'm excited about. We don't have to use every current structure, right? We don't have to use every current structure to pretty much do the work that has to be done. The structures that are coming, we have to create them to do the keying in. We have to create now new structures. We have to create new ways, new methods to accommodate the new technology. So here's my parting shot. When is our next discussion? And then how much time do I have to research to then bring us to that place with the new ideas to promote the new thing that we're about to do? Because guess what? We're in a new thing age. We're in a new thing moment. And the new thing that's required is coming from us. So the next time we do this, we'll have some of those answers. And I'm glad to be a part of this. I'm glad that you guys are with me and I'm with you. And, you know, this is a moment of change that is the change is now and the change is with us.